All right, so we are in Titus chapter 2. So if you want to open up your Bibles, let's get right down to it. Titus chapter 2. We're looking at this idea of what I'm going to call today living doctrines. So what we've already been talking about is what Paul was asking of Titus, what he was trying to encourage Titus to do. And that was the first part of the letter was to gain some leaders, try to get and find some leaders. And he was talking about some of the qualities and qualifications of those leaders. And now we're at the second part. So let's go ahead and kind of think in our minds, let's assume that that first task that Paul had has been done. He now has his team of people that are around him. They are people that exhibit the qualities that Paul outlined for him. And now it's Titus and his team. And so what we're going to be looking at today is this idea of leaders and followers. We're going to be looking at things that are happening in the church. We're going to be looking at what I'm going to call the chain of character. And then we'll look at some of the troublesome issues and then living traits. All of these things deal with relationship. And that's the key phrase I want you guys to think about. This is going to be a lesson today about relationship. What's the relationship between leaders and followers? What's the relationship between people in the church? What's the relationship with some of the character traits that Paul outlines? So we're going to be looking at all these things here, all in the context and all in the lens of relationship. So first thing I want you guys to look at is this idea of how to start a movement. And there's a video that I was going to show you. I have it. I'm not convinced that it's going to translate well on the screen because it's a raw video of a concert and it's very shaky. Would you guys like to see the video? Would you like me to describe it to you? It's all kind of shaky. So let me try to describe it to you. What this video has is there's a concert and there's this guy dancing to the concert music. And he's kind of acting a fool, right? He's kind of dancing kind of all over the place, right? But he's all by himself, and the camera's just trained right on him. So the question is, how do we start this movement? Because by the end of the video, there's probably 200 people around this person, all around, and they're all dancing the same way that he is. How did that happen? It happened in about 3 minutes. That's what the video shows. It outlines some pretty interesting things. So let's imagine Paul saying, Titus, here's what I want you to do. In essence, I want you to start a movement on Crete. And here's how you're going to do this. You're going to gain some other leaders behind you, and then those leaders are going to influence those people behind them. And when you see this video, or when I describe the video, what you'll see, what I want you to see is this guy is dancing, and he's all by himself. And if you're a leader doing something all by yourself, you know what they call you? Alone. Yeah, right? And so there's this idea of what does it take for that leader to turn into a movement? And then the video shows this other guy coming up. And he stands next to the guy and he starts dancing with the first guy. And we noticed that actually the movement didn't start with the original dancer. The movement started with the second person that came in and started to follow him. But then you see this. So the guy starts dancing in his own way. The first guy turns the second guy, takes his hands, and starts to move his hands like he's moving his hands. So what is he doing? He's teaching the guy how to dance his way. And the other guy's like, all right, I'll dance like that. So then the second guy starts to dance like that. So now they're both doing this, and they're dancing in this way. And then a third guy comes up. Then the two of them go to the third guy, and they show him how to dance. And then all of a sudden, you see the third guy look to his crowd out in the other part of the audience, and he beckons them to come over. He goes, come on, come on, come on. And all of a sudden, like 10 people come up. Vroom, and they start dancing. And then all of a sudden, there's another 10, another 20, until there's this huge crowd. So the idea is, when you start a movement, oftentimes, it's not about the initial leader. So here's what Paul's talking about. Here's how I'm going to relate this video to Paul. Paul says, Titus, you're going to be placed into Crete. But your leaders that you choose are going to be the ones that really start the movement. Because of two things. One, they are natives of this island. So they already have relationships built. You may not have those relationships that are built, but you are going to call leaders who will beckon their people to come to join the movement. So it's essentially not necessarily about this initial first leader. It's about how we're calling people to join us, right? So think about some of the ministries that you've had, some of the ministries that you have. How are you training your leaders? Because they're the ones who will build the relationships, already have the relationships already formed. This is what this looks like. So I've asked you to look at your sheets here. Here's what I want you to do together. So talk about it together as a table or as sections of tables. Here's what I want you to do. I've got two examples of groups. There's group 1 up here, and group 2 is down here. Here's what I would like you guys to do together. Now, your printout, somehow the printout didn't print as well as I wanted it to. I want you to notice that what I've done here, so this group, they're all speaking something, right? This guy's speaking about gears and hearts and lights. I tried to put them into the same symbols into their posters, but for some reason it didn't print out that way, but you can still see them, right? Here's the idea. This group, what does this group look like they're doing? They're performing. So what I was trying to get across was this is a protest, right? This is a protest. And now the things that they're protesting, the things on their signs are the same things that these people are saying, but this is a much different group of people, isn't it? So here's what I'd like you guys to do. Just come up with some thoughts, your own thoughts. When I say compare these two pictures, what do you see in these two pictures, especially in how it relates to this video and how groups are formed or how movements are formed? What do you see when you compare these two pictures? I'll give you like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes to look at these pictures, talk about it, and then we're going to share those ideas up here. Because I think it's crucial to the beginning of our conversation about what Titus is about to do. So you guys ready? Start talking together about these two. Compare these two pictures. So get ready to start sharing some of your observations as a group. I'm going to start off with a question and then let you guys talk from this point. Can you tell in this group who the leaders are and who the followers are? This top group, can you tell who the leaders are or who the followers are? Okay. What about this bottom group? Can you tell who the leaders are and the followers are? Okay, so you think the guy in front, but why would you say the guy in front, Jerry? Specifically this picture. What's that? He's got light, and where's he looking? Forward. What's he doing? He's got the hand of this one, and then you can see what's this one doing right here? She's beckoning. She's doing that beckoning thing, right? So she's reaching out back over here, and then he's doing the same thing. And now, so where would you say, if I were to draw a line, where would you say the leaders are of this group? So this one's a leader. Is this one a leader? Is this one a leader? All right. What about this one? All right. I would agree that we could draw a line right here and say these three probably look like the leaders and these ones look like followers. This one here, you can't tell who the leader is. Now I've put the leadership mantle in a person's hand. So this guy's the leader. What does he have in his hand? A light, right? He's got this fire. This guy here has a fire, but can you tell he's the leader? You can't tell he's the leader. All right, so now you tell me some of the observations you've seen in this picture when you compare these two pictures together. Just blurt them out.
Maybe the ones on the bottom here is a guy in a suit.
Yep.
And then there's various types of people that ride the track.
Okay.
And he's the soft guy, maybe that little thing on his head.
Yes. So if can I say it this way? What we're seeing here is diversity, right? There's some diversity in what the followers have, and all of them are different, but they're a diverse group of followers. Is that important to have in a group? Is diversity is important? Why is diversity?
You reach out to different, they've got different influence.
Exactly. So the star guy would reach out to star people. The checkmark girl can reach out to checkmark girls, right? Gear guys can hang out with gear guys.
But they have different gifts.
They have different gifts, right? So this relates to the different giftings. So the different interests, different cultures, different gifts. Exactly. These people here, do they have the same gifts? Pretty much. But is there? What's happening with their gifts here? There'd be a sense of confusion. There'd be a sense of what's that?
They'd like to see something change.
They want to see something change. And so a protest is an act of force, right? So here you have all these people with their giftings and all their desires and all their interests, and they're coming at you as one big glob. It's an act of force. Here is something different, isn't it? Now, obviously, I'm pointing you to which group is better. Which group am I telling you is better? The bottom one, okay? Somebody said, is there a time to protest? Is there a time for this? Yeah, there are some times to protest. Our country wouldn't be here without some form of protest, right? So I'm not saying that this one is better, but for our purposes today, what we're looking at here is how Paul took Titus, we can call this guy Titus, and he said, okay, Paul's given me the mantle of leadership, and I'm going to influence my leaders, and they are going to in turn influence their people at the same time. This is the model that we see in Scripture. This is the model we see with Moses, and this is a model we see in a lot of places and a lot of churches. Jason invests in us, and we invest in our leaders, and our leaders invest in other people. Those of you that are teachers of a Sunday school, my hope is that I try to influence some things for you, and then you influence your class, and then it's this model here that goes on down. So what else do you see in here? Somebody else. Those are some really good insights. Somebody in the back. They can't see it. Mark? The guy with he's got this eureka, right? Yes. Okay, so we as a staff, Michael Curtis led us through a process, and we have, if you go to our office, we have 11 things that we've agreed on as a staff to hold to. And one of them that you're talking about, we call it challenge the process. And so there are times where like with the car show, we'll say, okay, car show went great. What are some things we could have done better? What are some things we need to that we need to continue, right? So we're always looking at ways to challenge in the process to make it better. I had another military guy, he calls it the OODA loop. Have you ever heard of the OODA loop? OODA. And now I can't remember what the OODA, but it's like observe, decide, act, observe, decide. It's a loop. So you observe a situation, you make observations about that, and make some assumptions, and then you decide, and then you look at how your decision impacted that environment. Now you've got a new environment, so you do it again. Observe, and so it's this OODA loop. So It's David Jones. So if you guys know who David Jones is, he's the tank commander and got a great story. He's the one who told me about that. All right. Anything else? Any new thoughts? Uh-huh. She's not with it. Okay. So here okay, so we can extrapolate this and say, okay, in this structure, you know who's with you and who's not. When you're in a big mob like this, you may not recognize that this person right here isn't engaged. They're not engaged. Or they might even be paddling the wrong way, going the wrong way. And so, but with this group, you're at least aware because you have people facing different directions, right? But you know where they're facing. You know what they're doing. All right. Don't want to beat this to the ground, but is there anything else that you see that you just can't wait to share?
I have a question. How
Yes.
does this leader get these diverse people together?
So how did this leader do this? Is that what you're asking?
Well, did he know the business person? Did he know all these business people?
I would say that's a great insight. What did, so we have Titus, and so Paul said, Titus, when you're looking for leaders, what kind of qualities are you looking for? We went through them all last week. Looking for people who are upright, who are beyond reproach, who are willing to rebuke, who are willing to encourage. And so you gain this quality of a leader that's behind you, your team, and then they will influence and they'll get people who are like them. John Maxwell, he calls this the law of attraction. This is a little bit beyond our study, but I'll go here anyway. The law of attraction. If you took a group of 100 people and you put them in a room, and you put like a camera pointing straight down, and let's imagine that you could assign a number and put that number on top of their head. That number would represent their knowledge, their charisma, how well they lead, their experience, all that kind of stuff. And that amalgamation number goes into one big number. So you have people who are 10s. These are the people who are strong leaders. You have people who are 1s in this room, people who are weak leaders. John Maxwell says the law of attraction says this, is that the 1s and 2s and 3s will attract themselves to the 4s. And the 4s, 5s, and 6s will attract themselves to the 8s, and the 9s will attract themselves to the 10s. And it won't. So what he's trying to say is it doesn't take long for you to walk in that room and say, who's the leader in this room? And you'll know who it is because people arrange themselves. It's part of human nature. We've arranged ourselves to follow the people that we think best can lead us, right? So it's an interesting concept. You can look it up and look up the law of attraction, John Maxwell. This is kind of an answer to that. How do they do that? Because they attract people who are like themselves. And also, people are looking for others who can lead them well. So those two things combined, you begin to see how this island of Crete can become a hub of vitality when it comes to the Christian life because, and that's what Paul wants, Crete is right in the middle of the Mediterranean. Most all ships go through Crete, and so Crete is an important island to change the worldview, and so he needs to. So that's how that works. Does that make sense? All right, let's move on to another concept here. So we've already identified who these leaders are, right here and here, and these are the followers. Now look in Scripture, and here's what I want you to look at. So we're looking at, let's look at verses 1, and we're going to skip to verse 7 and 8. So those three verses, I want you to tell me what qualities these leaders should have, will have, because they've been picked by Titus already. So verse 1, what are some of the things that you see in verse 1 that talk about the quality of a leader? Okay, so I'm going to write these up on the board, so be gentle. And use small words, because I don't spell well. So, what is teach sound doctrine? Teach. You guys probably can't see that really clear in the back. Can you see it? Okay, good. So teach sound doctrine. What else? Sober-minded? Yep. Okay.
Older men are dignified.
Sober. So we're looking at verse 1.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because you'll see you'll see what I'm doing here in just a second. So verse 1 is just speaking about the leaders that Titus has gathered together. So what do you see in verse 1? Teaching sound doctrine? What else?
Well, they got to know it in the first place.
Okay. Things that are fitting. So the word accord, things that are fitting. So accords. Got to know it. All right. Now let's look at verse 7. What do you see in verse 7? What's good works? Be a model of good works. What else? Clean and dignified. So dignified. Somebody else?
It doesn't really say not a liar.
Not a liar. Okay. So,
Soundness of speech and not be condemned.
right, condemned. Yeah. So you're in verse 8 now. You're jumping to verse 8, which is good.
Oh, I thought we were two verses, 7, 8, 9.
So right now we're looking at verse 2 or verses 1, 7, and 8. So, what'd you say, Jerry? Liars?
Yeah. Soundness of speech and not be condemned.
No liars. Do it that way. Not condemned. Somebody else? What's that? Integrity. Yes. How would you define integrity? Beyond reproach. Some. Right. So integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's looking. I've even said do the right thing even when it's not doing the wrong thing even when the wrong thing's legal. Right? That's integrity. Anything else that you see in here? All right. So what I'm going to call this right here, this section for the leaders, those first few people in that line that you have on your piece of paper, the qualities of individuals that Titus has put around him should have all of these qualities, including the ones that are already mentioned in the previous lesson in chapter 1. Why is this important? I mean, let's talk about the negative. What's going to happen if your leaders don't have these qualities? What can happen? So there's a lack of trust. Yeah, Joan?
I'm thinking, looking for the scriptures that, if we're not careful, you're talking about the caring of people,
Yeah.
around the leaders, that you can also see that with people who have negative, as far as leading people astray.
Yeah.
Because they're charismatic, and
Mhm.
they draw people to themselves. So that's why it's so important to know, who you're following.
Exactly. So I've noticed this. You have a person who's drawn to. I don't want to say negative words here. It doesn't take long for anyone to find people like them. So if you're you're a rebellious nature, those rebellious people can find the other rebellious people in that room. You ever notice that? And so being able to have these qualities is important because it speaks to who they are, who they're going to be. If you're going to start a movement and your chain has weak links of the character, then it's going to break. your chain of leadership is going to break because of these weak leaders. Later on in this lesson, we're going to talk about how Crete is not exemplified by the words we just put up here, right? And so it's going to be a hard thing for Titus to find people like them. But when he does, and he puts them all in one place, it's like taking a candle, and you put up one candle that's in one part of the room, but then you put like 3 candles in the same place, it gets brighter. So you put all of these characters, all these leaders who have the same characters, and you put them in one place, it shines even brighter. So the word that we'll talk about is, are these leaders going to stand out, or are they going to be slaves to the opposite of what these are? Are they going to be slaves to being prone to lie? Are they going to be slaves to their undignified ways? Or are they going to stand out because they are dignified? So the first thing that Paul talks about with this new beginning of makeup of a church, he says your leaders are going to stand out because of these qualities. Make sense? Now, let's go even further here. Got to exit out of this. There we go. All right, so that's the verses. All right, now let's talk about the followers. But we have to do it in sections, because what Paul says to Titus, he says, your churches are going to be made up of certain types of individuals. And he does it by age. So the first part is going to be, well, how about this? You look through, this is going to be verses 2 through 10. And what age groups do you see Paul highlighting for this church? So the churches are going to be made up of groups of people. What types of people are we going to find in these churches? Old men. Okay. Hold on. One. Annotate. So old men. Old men. Old women. That kind of begs the question. What's the question? What do you mean by old? What's old? So Paul tends, in this way, in Philemon, Paul says that I'm an old man, that he himself is an old man, and he uses the same word that here, and Philemon, he's about 62, 60 years old. So I don't know what that means, but there's that. Old men and old women. What else do we see a category? Young men, no, young women, yeah. It helps to not, when you don't know how to spell, you just kind of squiggle, and it works, right? Yeah. All right, what's the other category? Servants. Yeah. What was that? That's verse 9, right? So servants. I think actually this. Yep. So young. Whoa, hello. All right. So we have a category here: old men and old women, young men, and servants. Are there more people in the church than these four categories? Yes, right? But in this particular conversation, this is who he outlines and this is who he addresses. He doesn't address children necessarily. He doesn't address masters. He doesn't address too much about husband and wife. He mentions a little bit, but it's not the main verses that we would go to about the family relationship, although it is built up in here. So here's what I want to do now. So we're going to do the same thing we did with leaders, but we're going to do that with these categories of old men, old women. So what I want us to do is find in Scripture, and you're going to call them out, the words that describe the qualities of the followers when it refers to old men and old women. You guys ready? All right, so verses 2 and 3, what are some of the qualities of old men and old women? Temperate. Good. Okay, temperate. It might help if you take the sheet of paper that you have, maybe turn it over, and write these down, because I'm going to have you do something that may require you to be able to see and read the words that we're putting up here. So on the back sheet of paper, put and kind of reproduce this. So what qualities will followers have? Verse 2 and 3 deals with old men and old women. First one is temperate. Yes, yes.
So they're not there yet.
They're not? Okay. So, and that's why I have this one right here. You know what? That is actually a typo. No, will have. They will have it. They don't have it now, but they will have. Right? That's good. That's good insight.
Well, but it, like in 2, it says older men are to be temperate, dignified.
Okay, but he's speaking that in terms of saying, yeah, should be. So at the end of our term together, Titus is saying, by the time I leave this island, we will have a group of people where old men are temperate. What else do you see? Dignified. So dignified, temperate, dignified. Somebody said over here. Self-controlled. Okay. Oh my gosh, is it really almost 11 o'clock? Sound and faith. Okay. Anything else? That is a lot. That is a lot, for sure. Well, watch what happens. All right, so let's go to the next category then. Verses 4 and 5. Who is this dealing with? Younger women. So what do we see for younger women? So love family. Love. Now, some say that Paul puts this in order of importance. So love husband, love children. Okay, what else for young women? Sensible.
Oh my goodness, here's a big one. Worker at home.
Yep.
How do you follow that?
It's one of those things if you read this in Greek, guess what it says in Greek? Worker at home. And so we look at that and we have to wrestle with that. That's part of it's part of the wrestling here. And it's part of it. That's part of it.
Did we skip older women?
No, we might have. I didn't know if this was. I don't have the verses in front of me right here. So are there older?
Yeah, there is older women in 3.
Okay, so what are some older women then?
Yeah, there should be reverent the way they live.
Okay. Reverent, slander,
Or addicted to wine.
wine.
And they're to teach what is good.
They're to teach. Who are they to teach about what is good? Younger women. So this is where I get this idea of the chain. Do you see this chain now? One's going into another. So, good. Thank you for bringing us back to older women. Sound and faith, reverent, wine, slanderer. Let's stop for a second and let me ask you this question. So we have verse 2 dealing with older men, verse 3 dealing with older women. Are there relationships between the qualities of an older woman that's the same as qualities for an older man? They may use different words, but they're the same thing. What would you say is if we could connect some things together, what would you say would be a good connection?
Well, older women are supposed to teach younger.
Okay, yeah. So what we're going to see here, and this is what I want. I'm going to show you. I'm going to kind of reveal what I want to do. Is I'm going to show you how these qualities, this chain of qualities of character traits, they carry from one to the next to the next to the next, and you'll see how they all interrelate with each other. Now, Paul uses different words for different emphasis, but you'll see. Like I'm looking at reverent. Let me choose orange. I'm seeing reverent that looks like dignified, right? Temperate, I see as someone who is sound in the faith, right? Or self-controlled. You see how those things connect? So I think it's interesting that Paul is telling Titus, here's the qualities, but when you really look at it, Titus, leaders, and Titus telling the leaders, we're teaching the church how to behave. We're teaching the qualities of the whole entire church. That's all interrelated. And this goes into the question, especially when we look at worker at home, right? So what we want to do a lot of times is pull out this and go, oh boy, no, I can't do that. And ignore all these other things where we share in the same kind of qualities. Worker at home, how many husbands, I'm asking the husbands, it's not the wives. Husbands, do you work at home? Yes. I wash windows, and I do the blinds, and I do the laundry sometimes. So worker at home, but we tend to focus on this and pull this out when really we're talking about one generalized, like the qualities all are interrelated. All right, but let me show you how this looks. So anything else for young women? Kind and subject. I mean, again, another one of those things that get pulled out, right?
Their actions are honorable.
Actions are honorable actions.
There's a really good reason that helps you do that at the end of verse 5, so that no one will malign the word of God.
Okay, exactly. So the whole reason for all of this. Now, one of the things we have in past here, we talk about this here at Colonial Hills, is can we do anything that harms God's name, Jesus' name, to where Jesus can no longer act in a place? Honestly, we want to say, well, no, God can plow through. What he's talking about here, what Titus and Paul are talking about here, is that going back to that shining examples, Crete was full of people who said they were Christians acting in horrible ways, to where the non-Christian in Crete were going, if that's what a Christian is, I don't want any part of that. That's the kind of thing he's talking about. Now, those Christians, those people who could still be impacted by Christ in different ways, but when it comes to the impact of the church, there is a sense of qualities that shine out as examples. Verses 6. Let's go that, because I've got I'm not even halfway through. All right. Anything else for verses 4 and 5? Anything? What about verse 6? This is dealing with older or young men. Yep. Now, it is strange that all he says to young men is be sensible, when you want to say a whole lot more, right? Be sensible. Yes. Don't do dumb. Don't do dumb. So a lot of the commentators I was looking at for this is verses 7 and 8 go back to Titus as a leader, but Titus was not a categorical older man, so perhaps we can say that the qualities that he's listing for Titus himself can connect to the younger men in this section. That's not the only reason why that would be clear is because why else would Paul put those two sentences together, those three sentences together, except to say the young men should not just be sensible, but let's look at 7 and 8, and if that's true, then what else would young men ought to be? Self-controlled. What else? Do good deeds. Do good. Joan?
Probably an ignorant question, but back then, did women go to church? Or
All
was
right.
it just the men?
So there were evidences that women went to church. There are evidences that women met together. But there was a separation. There was a not a separation. That's in a Jewish temple. But there was the women would generally be quiet in the service and all that.
So I'm thinking if they're not, if the men are hearing the word, then that's a good reason for the wives to be subject to the men,
Mm-hmm.
because they're believers.
Yes, I mean, I would agree. I mean, Linda, you've done a lot more about talking about this in your realm. What would you say to that?
Well, I know in this Ephesians, the man is so responsible. If you list all the things that God makes him responsible for, part of it is her sound mental health.
Yeah.
Whereas he gives her one thing to do, and that is to respect him. And so I just say, as women, we have the easier job. It's much easier to be respectful than it is to try to do all the things that he
Yeah.
has a responsibility. Spiritually to do for her.
I'm humbled and that God gave me. I love the way that Paul says it, to wash her with the water of the word, to wash her clean and make her sparkly and shiny with the water of the word. I love that. Scares me to death at the same time. Yes. All right, let's go on. So what else in 7 and 8? Honest. Yeah. I think you guys can see what's happening here, right? So let's just finish this out just real quick with verses 9 and 10, the bondservants. This is the slaves. One of the things that marked Scripture and Paul in the New Testament church that stood out amongst the Greek and Roman cultures is the fact that in the Christian churches, slaves were treated equal. That was unheard of in this time. And so what are some things that they speak of to slaves or bondservants? Verse 9, what are some words? Whoa, yeah? What was that? Submissive. What'd you say? Yeah, submissive. Anything else? Trustworthy. The very next letter, Philemon, which is another one of those individual letters, Philemon had a slave called, his name was Onesimus. Onesimus stole something from Paul pretty big that he ran away for fear of his life, and they got caught in Rome and got put in prison. And guess who Onesimus's roommate was in prison? Paul. Yeah, and it's just a great letter. I might do something soon with Philemon. Anything else with bondservants? What's it not to steal? Is it right? So, but okay. Now you begin to see right here that this chain of character for the church is deeply baked into the character of the church. The church of Crete is supposed to shine out. The churches in Tyler are supposed to shine out, not be dulled or not look like the culture, but we're supposed to shine out and become examples. In, I think it's verse 7, when he's talking to, well, let me see if it just go there. So there's older men. Okay, so verse 7, this is the 7 and 8 seem to deal with Titus and the leaders. Verse 6 is dealing with the self-controlled. I would actually, in Greek, I would put this phrase in all respect up to verse 6. So it would read this: likewise, urge younger men to be self-controlled in all respects, because then that all respects goes up here, because this word actually goes here in Greek, and so it's a mess. But so we think that in all respects goes actually to verse 6 and not to verse 7. And if that's true, then this opens up that window for the younger men to be self-controlled in everything we've just talked about. So now all of a sudden, the younger men not just have one thing, but they've got a bunch of things to work on. The word model is, in Greek, is the idea of a stamp. So when they would stamp metal or they would stamp leather, they would create a die, is what it's called, and they would mold something and be a model. So Paul is saying to Titus, show yourself to be a model of good works. And in your teaching, show integrity, dignity, and sound in speech. So you're supposed to impress upon your leaders, and your leaders will impress upon the church, and the church will impress upon the culture, and it begins to work its way through. And then the church of Crete will begin to impress upon the churches that are on shore, and those will press upon the churches that are up north in Europe and east into Asia, right? So it's this idea of pressing on, and it sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? At the very beginning, when we're supposed to be what? We're supposed to be images of God and carry His image out and be blessings to people. It's the same thing. All right. Do we have time to talk about these things? We don't. You do. Let's see how fast we can get here. All right. So there's 2 elephants in the room. So leadership and gender. Titus doesn't necessarily address it, but it's there enough for people to go, okay, so how do women lead in the church? Why is it just listed that men should be the leaders? What about the women? And I decided to do it this way. I'm going to step in here, Jerry, and just say it like this. There's 2 big words. There's complementarian views, and there's an egalitarian view. And basically what this means is that a complementarian view says this: men and women created equal in dignity, equal in identity, equal in empowerment and giftingness. They differ in the roles that they've been given. A man's been given these roles, women has been given these roles. Egalitarian will say equal in all ways, in giftings, in identity, in power, and the roles are interchangeable. So there are no real roles here. And egalitarian is where you have women pastors and that. So a complementarian generally would say men are pastors, women lead in other ways, other powerful ways in their roles. Now, these 2, if you go online, don't. But if you go online and you want to start and open up a dumpster fire, talk about these things right here and watch what happens online. It's just fantastic. It's really not. But there's other extremes that come out here. And oftentimes an egalitarian person, they call themselves egals and comps. So an egalitarian person will say a complementarian are actually patriarchal, meaning that women have no voice. So abuse is prevalent in churches that are complementarian, and so but because they're equating a patriarchal, and if you're down in Louisiana, a matriarchal. That's my joke. Did it work? Yeah, Mark's going matriarchal. Old Mama, you did not do anything that old Mama didn't want you to do. So, but patriarchy. Then there's over here with genderless, which means there are no roles and there's no gender-specific roles. And this is what the culture says. Now, I want to end with this part right here and say, how do you support yourself biblically with each of these? Because we have in our church really strong Christians who are egalitarian. And we have really strong Christians in this church who are complementarian. So where's the balance? And here's the best way I can put this. And this is how I think we can be at peace. An egalitarian will look at the examples of women in Scripture. And there are some powerful examples of women leading in Scripture. They're examples. There's also, for a complementarian, there's actual teaching. Somebody says that women lead this way, men lead this way, right? So for the most part, a complementarian will say, no, it's not really about the example, and this is really important to these guys over here, right? So take this for what you will. I have my own view, and it's about like right there, right? So since we're almost out of time, if you want to hear what my view is, I'll tell you what my view is. But it's about there, because it's not as clear cut as we think it is. Some people who say I'm a complementarian, you talk to them a little bit, and you're like, you sound a little more egalitarian than, like, especially at home, the way you live at home. I give a lot of things that you would say men do to my wife. My wife does a lot of things that you would typically say men do. So where does that make me here, right? All right. So for the sake of moving on really fast, we'll move past this. Are we okay with that? Anybody wish we could go further in this? Yes. Anybody else wish we could go further? Because we're not. We're not. All right. Let's move on to something that's a little more fun to talk about. All right. So, especially in our culture right now, we have two things here that Titus brings out. Here, Titus says, live an excellent life. Strive for good. Move with excellence in mind. Our culture talks about this big word called authenticity. Authenticity is, you know what? If you don't get it all done, that's okay. You're still okay. And that's true, right? So I have people, like this guy's walking, and this guy's just enjoying life. Don't worry about your junk. Try to fix your junk. Does that make sense? So we have people who say living an authentic lifestyle means that you're not afraid to share the bad parts of your life. You're not afraid to go and expose some of those things that you would want to hide. And these guys will say, I don't want to really share with you all that stuff because I'm moving for something better, right? But there's a gap here that I think we have to try to bridge. Do you guys have any thoughts about this before I go any further? About living authentically and living excellently? No? Because I think the bridge, and I think Titus, Paul says this in Titus, the bridge is this, that you are to live an authentically excellent life. Okay, now, is that a word trick? Yes. Here's what I mean by that. Paul's saying, don't talk about excellent things. Do excellent things. Be excellent. Live excellent. And the only way to do that is consistent ministry, consistent service. If we go back to all those traits that we just looked at for the church, a lot of them are dealing with relationship words and service words, words that benefit another person, right? So you can fake this really easy. You can fake, especially in our social media world. You see, the best way to put this would be, on Facebook, you just post the good pictures, right? These people over here would say, no, I'm just going to post all my bad pictures, right? So you can fake this for a little while. When you're working with the church, so consistent ministry, sound in faith. You can't fake sound faith for long. You can fake it for a little bit. You can fake it when you're trying to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend. But a few months in, the person's going, you're not all you said you were, are you? Right? So sound faith. So the idea that Titus is saying, or Paul is saying to Titus, is don't just act it, live it. The question is, how? And I've been looking forward to saying this all 60, 50, 70 minutes. How do we do this? We'll talk about that next week. And we're going to cover grace. So when he's talking about, so the next few verses are talking about how that happens is through the grace of God. To live an authentically excellent life sounds like a wordplay, and maybe it kind of is, but the truth of it is that the way we do this is through Christ and Christ alone. And Titus explains, or Paul tells Titus what that looks like in the next 5 verses. So we'll talk about that next week.